Well, these are going to be hard acts to follow. So thank you for your patience, and it's an honor to be here today, to have this opportunity. And special thanks goes to Hal, to Jim, and to Tom for making it possible. Some may say that giving a presentation is not rocket science, but when you're giving a presentation to some rocket scientists, it can be a bit daunting. So I'll do my best to leave you climatized. But first, I must emphasize the fact that unlike some people, I am not a climate scientist. I am a novelist who pens provocative political thrillers steeped in facts, and my writing style is probably best defined by the words of Francis Bacon, who once said that the truth is hard to tell, sometimes it needs fiction to make it plausible. Primarily, I weave facts regarding issues, contemporary issues we face today, with a fictional plot to add to the realism and the plausibility. While my stories are considered fast-paced thrillers, they're also poignant and informative reads. Admittedly, Bacon shaped my genre, but as a lifelong political junkie, I had no recourse but to delve into the political issues at hand. Because I wholeheartedly believe that just because you do not take an interest in politics doesn't mean politics won't take an interest in you. Pericles was a very wise man, and it is as true now as it was then in 450 BC. But I'm not here to talk about politics per se, or am I here to speak about science? There are too many experts in this room that would surely challenge me. So remember, I am just a novelist who has a vivid imagination and a lover of facts. I'm here to speak about the making of Climatized. But let me step back for a moment, because in this instance, I wasn't necessarily grabbing the story from a headline. It actually was an interest that spawned many years earlier. My first real memory was our moon party in July of 1969. My family and I gathered on the dock at our family camp in Damascotta, Maine. And after we listened to the radio and heard the words, "The Eagle has landed," my aunt, who's a history professor, launched into what had actually just occurred. It was really fascinating, and for the entire summer, it just seemed that it was so unreal, but it made everything seem possible, especially to a 14-year-old. And I remember my sisters and I, every night that summer, we'd look at the moon and try to see whether it looked different and constantly disagreeing, but in my mind, it certainly did. I received many more space lessons that summer, but my most vivid conversation about global warming specifically was many years later and took place in January of 2000 on Devil's Island in Antarctica. At the time, Joe, my husband, and now my editor, and I were on a scientific expedition aboard the Caledonian Star. One day we went ashore with our shipmates and went into a penguin rookery. But Joe and I needed a little more exercise, and we were rescued by one of the scientists and lecturers on board. He was the one person that was allowed to, was permitted to roam free. Our savior was Professor Ray Arvidson, who at the time was the lead investigator at Washington University in St. Louis. He was the one who analyzed and archived the data that was provided to him from NASA's Mars exploration rovers, the Spirit and Opportunity. I recall that we left the rookery and we climbed and hiked up a sizable hill. And we sat there overlooking the Terra Gulf. We kind of stopped for a breather. And it was there that Professor Arvidson explained that he was investigating the fundamental questions of life and survival, and that Mars was a laboratory for studying global climate change. He was in Antarctica specifically to study the terrain that mimicked Mars. In all honesty, much of what he explained at the time went over both of our heads. but I recall vividly his conclusion: you can't change the climate. He believed it was the role of scientists to understand climate and to learn ways to adapt. He explained that perhaps one day we may not be growing corn in Nebraska, but Greenland could become an ideal location for a thriving crop. Years later, I recall the experience while weaving the topic of global warming in my earlier novel, The Ultimate Revenge. The novel delved more heavily on politics, focusing on the events that catapulted the global warming onto the stage. Connecting the dots between Gro Brundtland and Maurice Strong, Agenda 21, the Earth Summit, Al Gore, the Chicago climate change, the international climate change, and the Clear Act all led to a very inconvenient truth. But even after my extensive research, I had nagging questions, so I delved deeper in search of the answers. First, I asked, can humans create enough global warming to create a catastrophic effect? How would it be possible to affect the climate on a regional basis? And why would countries, let alone entire continents, set aside their political, social, economic needs for the greater good? These and many other questions kept tossing about in my mind. I was not on a scientific quest, but as a layperson, frankly, the rhetoric was empty. What I concluded from the same agnostic eye is that empirical scientific data did not coincide with public policy. Anthropogenic global warming appeared to be a pathetic argument, and it needed to be challenged, but in a way that could reach a wider audience. So I chose to use a novel as the platform, and I began to write Climatized. Initially, it didn't take a lot of deep diving research to understand that something was seriously awry. Consistently, the United Nations and world leaders insisted the science was settled, while factions of scientists using empirical data insisted it was not. The US administration said it was not debatable. Clearly, it was. And it fired up the debate and a format that appealed to both skeptics and deniers alike. For me, there were clearly two issues. Could AGW have a catastrophic effect on the Earth's temperatures? Are there negative effects to global warming? For scientists who use scientific data and do not rely solely on unrealistic climate models, the answer is resounding no. However, the politicians persisted in muddying the waters with misinformation and pseudoscience. The change in the political narrative from global warming to climate change seemed calculated, where instantly deniers of global warming, who specifically denounced AGW, were suddenly classified as deniers of climate change. But who could deny climate change? I'm 11th generation from the state of Maine, and I was taught, if you don't like the weather, wait a minute. I've also trekked in Mongolia, where I've had 4 seasons in one day. So truly, how could you change the climate? But this intentional game of smoke and mirrors was crucial to the game. Now, I know I said I would not speak of politics per se, but the political junkie in me is sometimes uncontrollable. So if you would indulge me a moment longer, I'd like to take a slight detour into my conspiratorial theory. What if the catastrophic effects of global warming were proven to be untrue? What if the Potemkin global warming village of cards were to fall? The IPCC would cease to exist. Bloated governments would deflate. Green manufacturers would go belly up. The fallout from exposing such a scam would have devastating implications. But equally as devastating would be if the scam continued to exist. Therein lies the catch-22. I fully believe it is incumbent upon citizens of the world to protect our planet. However, our public policies are revolutionary and destructive. To succeed, those policies must be evolutionary, utilizing ingenuity and technology to improve our standard of living. Poor Pericles. He must be rolling around in his afterlife, not able to fathom how 2,000 plus years later, one political narrative could grip the entire world. If he were here today, he might say, the world has been climatized. Forgive me for preaching to the choir or unleashing a tinge of conspiracy, but I'm passionate about the subject and hope to engender my readers to feel the same. This passion and my desire to separate the facts from the rhetoric and present the storyline in a logical way led me to the making of Climatized. Now, for the unveiling. In Climatized, Maxine Ford debuts as female protagonist in her role as a private investigator. She's intelligent and attractive, but a determined nature and a formidable mouth shape her persona. According to Jay Lair at the Heartland Institute, who reviewed Climatized, he said it will be difficult for male readers not to develop a crush on our heroine, Max Ford. Right out of the starting gate, Max finds herself mixed up in murder and mayhem. When she is hired by the wife of a prominent senator to determine the cause of his untimely death, it leads her to discover that 3 world-renowned scientists also lost their lives days before they were supposed to testify in front of the Senator's Committee on Climate Change. A 4th scientist has gone missing. Max determined he is the key to unearthing the motives behind the deaths. A partial clue leads her to Sarasota, Florida. Then after a series of events, lands her in the hospital and then to Italy. Following many more twists and turns, she discovers a powerful organization responsible for the killings, and their motive is uncovered. This cogent evidence is given to the President of the United States. He must now face a crucial decision: to cover up a diabolical plot or bring down a multi-trillion-dollar worldwide industry. Now, unlike my other novels, I altered my style slightly by pairing my fictional scientists up with real organizations and a few real-life characters. My fictional character, Klaus Hunet, worked for Phil Jones at the Climate Research Unit in East Anglia, and he was mixed up in the email scandal. Another character, Luke Dorfinger, worked for Benny Peiser at the Global Warming Policy Foundation in London. However, neither Klaus nor Luca had direct interaction with the real-life characters in the narrative. But for Jonas von Baumer, it was slightly different. He worked for the Center for Global Food Issues, a project of the Hudson Institute, and reported directly to a real-life character named Dennis Avery, the former director and best-selling New York Times co-author with Dr. Fred Singer of Unstoppable Global Warming Every 1,500 Years. I brazenly had Dennis interacting with other fictional characters as well throughout the story. Our 4th scientist, Antonio Maielli, who eventually went into hiding for his life and ultimately revealed the organization responsible for the killings, worked for another organization called NASA. Because of my real interest in NASA and its commanding views on climate change, this organization became the perfect outlet for our hero, Antonio. But I needed to find the right association for him. Creating his job was easy. Antonio worked on creating a new synthetic polymer by chemically altering cellulose derivatives that could be used in the production of space gear, making it lighter and more resistant to environmental factors. Okay, my wild imagination and a little help from Google. But surprisingly, Antonio had nothing to do with climate change until his sponsor, Dr. Hal Doran, introduced him to the Right Climate Stuff research team, including its members Tom Weissmuller and Jim Peacock and Larry Gould. You may be asking how I stumbled onto this illustrious group. In a word, serendipity. And an article I discovered in the Business Insider written by Gus Lubin. It discussed the letter that had been sent to Charles Bolden, the NASA administrator at the time, and signed by 49 NASA astronauts and scientists. The tenor of the letter was just what I was looking for, a challenge to the science that had yet to be settled. I decided to investigate the names on the list and look for a sponsor for Antonio. The name I discovered, 13th down on the list, had retired, but he was currently an active chairman for a group of Apollo space veterans who selflessly volunteered their time to address the very questions I had set out to answer. Then I discovered other members, and last but certainly not least was the name Tom Weissmuller. I scoured TRCS's website. I read the various reports. I listened to the conferences, and I was convinced I had found the right climate stuff for my storyline. Here's where it gets interesting. I researched the legal ramifications of using real-life characters in this manner without their permission. I discovered that if I didn't disparage or misquote them in any way, it was my legal right as an author. But it didn't feel right, and it certainly was not the courteous thing to do. So after my manuscript was completed, I set out to make contact and explain what I had done. A friend who had worked with Dennis Avery agreed to pass the manuscript along to him, so that was fairly easy. But what was unexpected was to receive a phone call at home in Italy a few weeks later. Dennis's first statement from miles away in Virginia was that I had accomplished what no other human being in the Western world had been able to express. Then he proceeded to read aloud an outstanding review he had written. At that juncture, I was feeling pretty cocky, so I stepped up the ante and I took an astronomical leap. I decided to contact Tom via LinkedIn and Hal through the TRC website. Tom was the first to reply and requested a pre-publication version that he would also pass along to Hal, to Jim, and to Larry Gould. In his correspondence, he said it would be wise to allow us the ability to exercise a literary veto, where they or the TRC are mentioned. I wasn't the least bit deterred by the request of a literary veto because it was imperative that the science be factual and that the storyline be plausible. Needless to say, I was thrilled at their willingness to read and fact-check my manuscript, and I gladly accepted the challenge. It turned out to be a remarkable collaboration. From the meticulous details, explanations, suggestions, and corrections, it was clear they had devoted the time and interest to read the manuscript thoroughly. Their feedback has also greatly added to my understanding of the climate change debate. Dedicated to getting it right and willing to accept the support of these scientific minds has paid off, as you can see from this growing list of endorsements. A credible expert presenting a plausible scenario that would descend on the planet soon, Dennis Avery. She has found a stunningly innovative way to draw attention to one of the great issues we're dealing with today, Tom Weissmuller. Readers of Climatized can expect adventure plus enlightenment, Larry Gould. Never will you be forced to the edge of your seat in a mystery thriller while being steeped in scientific education of great importance to humanity, J. Lair. A murder mystery thriller full of potential political intrigue and meticulous scientific accuracy that gets about as close as you can get to the truth and still call it fiction. Hal Doran. Now, for those of you who know how, that's the short version.
That's what I was thinking.
The review in its entirety was so eloquently stated that you'll find its complete remarks in the foreword of the book. Also, Jay Lehr's full-page review can be seen on the Heartland Institute's website. Why is this so important? Because climate change has become a topic up there with religion and politics that creates not only heated conversation, but much confusion. I believe Climatized will put a rest to much of the confusion and shine a light on the real science, returning the discussions to the dining room table. These endorsements establish credibility and help to promote Climatized not only to a wider audience, but to spread the truth about a topic of mutual interest we share. And most certainly, the reader will discover that 97% of the climatists in the world do not believe in AGW. To that end, a heartful thanks goes to a very special group of American heroes, to Hal, Tom, Jim, Larry, and many others I have not met today in this room. And with the support of the Right Climate Stuff research team, the Heartland Institute, and others, I think I can safely say, Houston, we have liftoff. I'd like to just add two other quick notes. I received 2 emails from people that would like me to pass along information to you. One is from Jay Lehr, who said he was asked by a top Trump aide to put together a power presentation to explain the global warming fraud. They accepted it, they loved it, and he was only disappointed that he wasn't giving it to the top guy. But he's hoping that that will have some impact. Also, I received an email from Dennis Avery, who pointed out that in the CERN Courier magazine issue of December, there was an article on the clouds and validated the Svenmark theory. And the CERC has said that all climate models must be redone because they're over-calculating warming. Dennis has written a letter to Wall Street Journal op-ed, and he sent a copy to Myron Ebel. And I have that email. I passed to Tom, and I'll pass to everyone else. He's free to have it be distributed. So thank you, and any questions? And as you know, thanks to David Dunham, my publisher, we have complimentary copies of the book, which you must read, review, and pass along and tell everybody about. Thank you.